And how do you break your practice rounds down personally?
Personally, it depends on how many times I've played the course. So when I first play the course, I'm throwing about 4 to 5 tee shots as often as possible, unless I obviously have the hole dialed. But I'm going to throw 5 different tee shots, especially if I'm going to different landing zones. So I know what power I'm looking to put into my shots, so that my next time when I come through, I'm dialing in 1 or 2 tee shots and really figuring out how I'm going to attack the hole, because you're pretty much scrapping 3 of the 5 that you're throwing if you're playing to a blind landing zone. And Northwoods, there's a lot of blind landing zones. Throwing too short can punish you, and throwing too long can punish you. So really making sure you have those distances is huge. So I'm always doing that, and then I'm always trying to approach from different areas of the fairways a lot of the time, and hit a bunch of putts on the green. So I'll do 10 or 15 putts before I move on to the next hole a lot of times.
Yeah, that's really smart. I can imagine how that kind of gets you dialed in and just feeling a lot better about the hole than just kind of playing it once. And I imagine you're not scoring those practice rounds and getting that mumbo jumbo in your head, are you?
Typically not. But before a tournament, I try to play one competitive round if I can, whether it's for like a lunch or playing with one of your friends, whatever. But playing for score, having a scored round beforehand is nice, so you can set yourself a pace with a little bit of pressure. I like to have that pushing me to go a little harder, because I have goals and objectives I want to execute during my round. And if I'm doing that, I know I'm setting myself on a good pace, and I know that there's room for me to grow, or room for me to work on as I'm trying to continue my next rounds.
I guess, how did you know when you felt like you were getting really good at disc golf? Just winning locally, or what?
To an extent. I started, so when I got sponsored by MVP, it was my freshman year of college, and I was 4 rated. And then by the end of the season, I was 994. And by the end of that season, I was 1013. No, I was 1003. And then I was 1008. And I was like, all right, I'm playing pretty good golf. I'm feeling more comfortable, and I'm playing with people that are good at golf, and I'm beating them. And so it was important for me to know that I could compete with better players. And then I started playing and winning more pro tournaments. And I won 6 pro tournaments in a row. And I was like, all right, like that was when I knew, I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And I stopped like serving, and I did lessons. So I ran lessons for $50 a session for an hour. And then I would have like 15 lessons in a week on top of playing tournaments on the weekends. And I had online college at that point, so I was able to set up my own schedule and just do that. And it was pretty helpful.
Wow, that's really awesome, man. So how difficult is it to get to 1,000 rated? You said that it took, I want to say, about 3 years, right? Is that about correct for you, kind of getting your rating and taking it seriously?
When I started pushing for it, when I wanted to get to 1,000 rated, at that point, I was like 965. And I was like, you know what? Like, I could push to 1,000 rated. And it took me about a year and a half. And disc golf is hard. It is not an easy game, and you can't be good at disc golf every single day. It's just impossible. It is a day-to-day sport. But you can go out there and you can be as consistent as possible. So one of the biggest things, if you're looking to try and get to that 1,000 rated mark and you're looking to try and grow, is building consistency and form. And so I started to rework a lot of my form to where I could consistently throw it one way 85% of the time. And if I could do that, then I could start honing different skills of my throw, whether it's spin control, speed control, torque angles, rollers, whatever it was. I needed to be able to have the consistency first before I could work on different aspects. And in doing that, it was able to build my confidence, and throwing better shots in competitive rounds gives you the confidence to make more putts and continue to throw good shots, not throw good shots, miss your putts, and then try and go and throw more good shots. It hurts. So it's super, super helpful if you're trying to do that.
What helped you out the most when working and fixing your form?
For me, my mom has a master's in early childhood and education, and my dad is a professor for paramedic classes in college. So I grew up learning how to teach. And so a lot of working my form came from teaching form to other people and teaching how I threw. So I was able to rework what it was that I had learned, make notes, and I have like full notebooks on it on like what I've done to adjust my form and what I'm looking to do for consistency. And then I was able to use that, turn it into notes and lesson plans to be able to teach to other people that were learning how to play this game. So teaching is a really, really good way to learn, especially for yourself. But knowing that when I'm watching these pros that are playing, watching Jomez, you watch any of the big YouTube companies that are or the big YouTubers that are covering these big rounds, and you're seeing the best players in the world throw, and inadvertently you start to emulate that, whether you mean to or not. It starts to happen. But noticing that I wasn't keeping myself as compact as I needed to was huge, and that is such an important thing. There's a lot of pulling over and across your body instead of through your body, and that is a game changer when it comes to working out your form.
If I'm somebody who is not really good at teaching or helping like others by like kind of giving advice from myself, or let's say even I'm, too self-conscious about my own form to kind of feel like I can teach anyone or anything like that, do you have any tips or advice for someone like that who wants to improve their form? Like how could they go about doing that? Do you think like just filming themselves is enough, or what could they be doing?
Coolest thing about disc golf is there is no one way to do anything. There's not. You look at the best putters in the world and everyone putts different. You got Matteo, you got Rick, you got Paul, you got Nico. Like they all putt different. They're all phenomenal putters, right? So the same thing can go about throwing. You got Gavin, you got Matteo, you got Ricky, you got Paul. They all throw differently. So if you're trying to work out how to throw, you break down the fundamental components of what makes throws work, and you go and just look at it and study it and see what their common variables are and be like, all right, this is what's working, and film yourself and reapply and film yourself and reapply until you can start to emulate those things in your form, and your form will grow. But it's so important that you really are getting reps doing it the right way, not reps doing it the wrong way, because that teaches bad habits, and bad habits make you play bad disc golf.
Do you still work on your techniques and forms?
Yes, that is no doubt about it. If I want to be able to compete with these guys that are higher rated than I am and the best in the world, I have to stay true to my form and how I work. My form is different than a lot of people's, and that's okay. But I work at it. I hit the field. I work out my discs. I figure out how to put in more spin control and less spin control based on the tournaments that we're at. And it is critical. It is critical to have good fieldwork practice if you want to be able to compete. It's huge.
I've got two questions spinning off of that. The first one is, when you say spin control, what exactly are you talking about, and how can somebody maybe work on that? And you can kind of tie this to the next question as well. You said that field work's obviously very critical. What are some things that I could be doing out in the field that would help me the most?
Perfect. So one, a major component that not a lot of people realize, or it seems like people should realize but don't get just yet, is that there are two factors that go into throwing, or two factors that go into flight. You have speed, so the amount of speed that you're giving the disc, and spin is the amount of rotations you're putting on the disc. The more rotations you have that you put on the disc, the longer that disc is going to stay in the air. So it is critical that you're able to have good spin control for your disc. The more you can spin it, the longer your disc can stay in the air. The more power you give it, the more it's going to turn over and the more speed you're going to get. But if you have a lot of power and no spin, your discs are going to burn over or fight out way too fast. If you have too much spin and not a lot of power, your discs aren't going to go very far, but they're going to glide. So a lot of spin control is a lot of wrist control. And that wrist control comes from curling your wrist and snapping your wrist out like you would pop a towel. A lot of people say if you want to throw hard, you pop it like a towel. But really, that's just how you're spinning the disc. And spin adds distance. So a lot of people think that they have to get their arm speed up to throw farther, and that is not always the case. Like, yes, arm speed helps, but there are two variables, and you're really only looking at the one variable, which is speed, and you have to have spin. So good spin drills in practice is getting 3 different discs, putter, a mid, and a driver, and you're throwing the putter and spinning it straight and keeping it on line the whole time. and then throwing a mid and trying to hit the exact same line, but you're going farther. And if you want to keep this in line, you are spinning. So you're going to spin it harder to control that line. And then you're going to do the same thing with a driver, and you're going to try and spin it and keep it on that line the whole time. And so you can do different stabilities of mids, putters, and drivers, but you want to keep them all the same. So I'm doing overstable driver, overstable mid, overstable putter. And then I'm doing straight putter, straight mid, straight driver, and then understable, understable, understable. And it's important to help you learn the different touch control. So spin and touch are typically interchangeable. You have to have good spin control, and you have to have good touch to settle the disc by the basket. So it's super, super critical to make sure that you're able to use your wrist in your shots when you're throwing.
For someone wanting to, maybe learn the fundamentals of spin control and wanting to start out, would you suggest it's best to start out with understable discs because you'll be able to easily notice, when you roll them over?
Sure. I think understable mids are going to be your best bet to start learning spin control. Understable mids, like we have a hex that just came out. We have some new mids from MVP that are going to be coming out that are understable, and those discs are so good to learn how to spin a disc. It is very, very crucial to make sure you're able to learn how to flip a disc up to flat, flip it up and turn it over and get it to flex out, and then flip it up, turn it over, and know that it's not going to come back with all of your discs, because all of your discs will do that, but you have to know what it's going to take to get them to do that. And so it's super, super critical to know all of your disc flights at all different points, so then you can pick the best disc for the right holes when you're playing all these different courses.
I feel as though I've heard from two different camps. One where when you're coming through and you're hitting the power pocket, your wrist should be locked straight, and then you're just kind of, snapping it forward, I guess, as as the disc is ripping out of your hand. And then there's the other camp who, when you're coming through that power pocket, your wrist should be curled in. So when the disc rips out, there's more spin theoretically. Is there a right and a wrong way to come through the power pocket like that? Like, what exactly is your wrist doing when it's coming through the power pocket? Because I feel as though, if you're doing the wrong one, that could deeply impact how much spin you have on the disc. And B, if I feel as though something that could go wrong is you're almost like herky-jerky trying to extra spin on the end when you should just be letting your body naturally do the motion. So if you could maybe just explore that a little bit more, I think that would be helpful.
So spin, there is no right and wrong in disc golf. There just isn't, right? There's so many different ways to throw it, like we talked about earlier. So there is no right and wrong when it's coming through the middle. You can have people tell you it's one way, and you can have people tell you it's another, and it's really just what works for them. It is critical that when the disc is coming through your power pocket, your wrist is in a position that you can give it the most spin for you. Whether that's locked for you, whether that's curled for you, it is what it is. But you'll notice that a lot of the players that throw farther are having more of a curled wrist as it's coming in. Gavin does a really good job of showing it. Ricky has a really good job of showing it. When he's in his power pocket, his arm is curled, his wrist is here. Because when it comes out, and Ricky's one of the farthest throwing players on tour right now, when it comes out, he is giving it more of that wrist opening up and snapping through. And that is a critical motion. But some people can get all that snap with a locked wrist coming through. So there's no right or wrong. It's about what works for you in particular.
Is that just something, you kind of have to go out to the field and just practice both of them for a while? And I don't mean going out there and practicing it, 5 throws for each one and then this doesn't work. How long would you recommend?
I would say throw every disc in your bag 3 times and then try it again 3 times and figure out what it's going to be. So it's 6 times over and over, but it's very important to make sure that you're able to figure out if that is going to be right. Okay.
I feel as though there's a potential for maybe rounding to be caused by trying to maybe curl your wrist in. I feel as though, I don't know, just something maybe you're trying to curl it too much and focusing too much on getting your wrist to release the disc, that instead of coming through straight, you're coming through and then rounding as a finish. Is there, do you think that is a possibility, or is there a way to fix that if it's happening, or am I just going crazy?
There is a possibility for anything in disc golf. It's just bound to happen. I play with a guy that hit first available T sign today. It's just going to happen, right? And it doesn't matter how good you are or how good you are. You can curl by doing this, yes. It's stuff like that can happen, but it's all coming back to building that stroke that you can hit 85% of the time, and then working around it and heightening the other aspects of your game. I built a stroke that works for me 85% or better of the time, and I learned a spin control that works there. You have to have a core swing before you can start hitting these other topics. Right? So if you're sitting here trying to make all of these changes right now and put all of them into it, it's going to suck to start with. Like, in the nicest way possible, it is not going to work out very well. It is something that you have to build. It's same as like if you're building like a structure, right? And you're an architect, you can't build something that doesn't have a strong foundation. And our strong foundation in this aspect is going to be our swing, right? Something that at 85-90% of the time we can execute each time, right? And then you're building up, and then you're like, oh, spin control, amount of wrist curl, and then you're like, all right, from here, amount of precision, the amount of torque. Then up here, you're looking, all right, how much speed am I balancing the spin with, the right disc choices, the right flights, and then you're just steadily building it up. And where you're peaking at your disc golf game. But you can't sit there and assume that you can put all of these core components together and immediately get this tower. You have to build it from the ground up, and it all starts with being able to make sure that you can have something consistently that you can do before you can work on the next heightened levels of the sport.
What would be a good test? How would you know when you have something and it's consistent?
I would always do it. So for me, the only times I've ever had to test stuff like that is when I'm working with someone or doing lessons with them. When I'm doing lessons with them, it's easier for me to see it in person. So I guess I haven't really had to test it any other way, but I would assume get a gauge for a course that you play, right, that is wooded. You want to have something that has gaps a lot, and then go through the course of your first tee shots, note how many gaps you hit, how many gaps you didn't hit, right? And then after working on this for like a month or 2 weeks, go back through and note the amount of gaps you're hitting and the gaps you aren't. And over time, the more repetitions you have in your swing, the more consistency you get. It'll kind of show, but once you're hitting like 85% of these gaps, then it's time to start working on the next parts that can help you shape your landing zones or shape your spin control coming into the greens, or analyzing your right discs for the right shots, because sometimes it's easier to hit the gap with a fairway driver, but really it's a mid shot because it's a dangerous green and you're trying to control your angles or whatnot. So it's super, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to know, but when you're hitting about 85% of the gaps on your wooded course, it's likely time to move up, assuming that this is actually a technical wooded course. About the best I got for you there. When you stop being a student in this game, you will stop being able to compete. And it's so important to just be able to take these things in stride, take the losses, take the successes, take them in stride, and just let them shape you into a better player, and do everything you can to mold that. And it is super critical.
You are currently number 2 right now when it comes to Circle 2 putting. How do you get to be number 2 in Circle 2 putting? Like, what I guess is the big difference between putting in Circle 1 and putting in Circle 2? Is there anything you're doing differently in your putt?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So for me, it is something that I always teach, right? But when I teach people, I teach them that there are 2 strokes. You have a stroke for Circle 1, and you have a stroke for Circle 2. So if one of them isn't working, you can still rely on the other one, and you're not having an entirely terrible putting day. For me, that works. It's not the same for everyone, and that's fine. But what I teach is that you have 1 putt for Circle 1 and 1 putt from Circle 2. So I step putt from Circle 2. For me, I have built this stroke, and that stroke is entirely based on timing. It is critical to have perfect timing when you are step putting. And so I'll spend 30 minutes before a round just step putting until it is feeling pure and good. At D-Glow, I was first in the field for C2 putting, and I was 65% from C2, and the next closest was like 45. And it was just because I was driven and practicing. But that C2 putting is all about confidence and working on your timing. And I have too much confidence in C2 putting right now. It tends to hurt me every once in a while. So it's good to make sure that you don't get too big for your britches. And it's great to miss one sometime that just like completely three putts you and you're like, all right, fair enough. It's good.
But I feel like if you're being able to run circle two putts as a rec or events player, you give yourself a lot more potential for birdies than most people would.
You do. Learning how to run circle two putts without being too dangerous is huge, because it's not just be like, oh, I can make it. You have to get yourself up to the percentages to be able to do that. Like same as when I talked about earlier about building a stroke, right? You build a stroke at 85% that you can execute, then that's what you take and that's what you build on. But circle two putting, you need to be making 1 for 3 before you're sitting there and be like, all right, I'm running this. And you need to be making the comebackers. You can't be putting for birdie from circle two and turn around and bogey that hole. You just can't do it. And you should not do that on flat ground ever. If you do, you've done something silly. Like that is how you lose strokes. So you really need to make sure that you are confident in your abilities to do it. C2 putting is all about swagger and it's all about confidence. And you have to walk up knowing that you can be that guy that's going to make that putt, regardless of if someone just misses it or if they chain out or if they do something else. You have to know that you can do that. And it's critical. It's so critical to be able to know that you have the percentages to do it. So in rec and intermediate, it's not about just being like, oh, like I can make this 1 in 8 times. Like lay that sucker up. Like you'll for it a heck of a lot more and you'll to it. So lay it up. Don't have fear. Smart golf is good golf. And I teach that to everyone I've ever had as students. Probably the one thing that they're always going to remember is smart golf is good golf. Don't be afraid to lay up. Don't be afraid to throw a disc 150 feet and then throw 300 feet instead of throwing 350 into the tight gap or whatever and then throwing 150 to the basket. It is so important to know that you don't always have to park the hole. So smart golf is good golf. Playing to get putts, playing to high percentage areas, and laying up. Disc golf is a numbers game, and it's so critical to make sure that people understand and remember that when they try and play the game.
So I guess that leads me to this question of maybe you're somebody listening and you want to get better at your circle two putting. You find yourself coming up, 35, 45 feet short of the basket, and you want to get more of those birdies. What kind of drills do you have that can help somebody with a step putt?
Super important to understand that step putts can be broken down into 2 motions. Right, your first motion is bringing the disc into your core, bending your right knee, assuming that you're right-footed, but whatever your lead foot is, bending that foot, bringing your weight to your center and bringing the disc to your center. And then that second motion is exploding, is pushing off with that right foot, pushing off with your lead foot, extending your arm out and following through on the basket. Those are your 2 motions, making sure it's a 1-2 motion. So I can load and extend, and it's very important to make sure it's not just all one motion, because if you're trying to load, extend, swing down, swing up, and follow through all in one thing, it's not going to be as consistent. And the goal is to make disc golf as consistent as possible. So it's super important to be able to deliver the putt and follow through. And if you want to get good at C2 putting, whether it's step putting, whether it's straddle jumping, whether it's just regular inline putting, the biggest and most crucial factor is understanding that you have to follow through in your shots. You've got to follow through. You've got to deliver the disc to the basket. And if you're in C2, delivering the disc to the basket is the most important variable if you want to be good. Because you can't airball right and left. That is the biggest no-no in disc golf. You have got to miss high or low every time. Airballing right and left will kill you in this game. So you've got to make sure that you are delivering, extending, and following through on the basket in the center of the pole. And sorry, one more thing. In practice, I never count my putts unless I'm hitting the pole. If I hit right side chains and it goes in, it doesn't count. It's so critical to make sure that you are hitting the pole, and you are training yourself that your only good putts are putts that strike the pole, because that is when you're getting in, not getting lucky. Like, oh, I squeaked that one in there. Like, that's a good putt. No, that putt sucks. Hit the pole, and that's a good putt. You have got to hit the frame of the basket in all of your putts. You got to do it. If you're going to run it, you got to know you're going to hit the basket or lay it up. If you don't think you can make it and it's a dangerous run, just accept that it's not your time to hit that putt and lay it up. That is the best way to shave strokes off your round. It was so easy to 3-putt when you're like, I should make this one, and it's like 60 feet through the woods. You're like, yeah, this is it, and it skips off the top and goes to like 40, and you're like, oh, why did I do that? And it's like, it's critical. It's so critical to understand that it's numbers based, and knowing where your strengths are and where your strengths are not. Knowing where you're weakest is one of the best things you can do in disc golf.
The wind obviously affects putting in general, but does it affect circle 2 putting more than circle 1 putting? When you're doing a step putt, is there anything different you're doing with a wind read than you're doing from maybe 15, 20 feet away?
Oh boy. That's a tricky question, because wind itself is tricky all alone. You have to know what a crosswind's going to do. You have to know what a tailwind's going to do. You have to know what a headwind's going to do. But you also have to know what a cross left to right, what a cross right to left, what a head right to left, what a tail right to left. When you have a tailwind that it feels, but it's actually going to lift your putter. So it's so important to be able to make these minute adjustments. But I would say from C1, it actually impacts my disc more than it does from C2, because your percentages from C1 need to remain high. And it's important that they stay high so that you can have the confidence to throw good shots. So C1 putts require more spin in the wind. If you want to cut through the wind and have more consistency, putts have to have more spin. And so from C1, it is critical that you're able to give that spin, but not as much speed, because if you mess it up, you don't want to be going a million feet in the wrong direction. But from C2, you can typically make your same stroke and make adjustments for the wind because it's coming in at a similar rate, but you're able to give it the speed that you need already and the spin without having to put more on it than you do for C1. So in C1, you're having to put on more. C2, you can keep it about the same, and you just make the adjustment in your jump or in your arm swing and your upswing or something like that. I'm making sure I'm following through higher or more to the right, making the minor adjustments for the wind. But C1 is so important to spin the crap out of it.